going over homework 6. So let's just go ahead and jump into problem 1. So it asks us to write a program to ask the user to input a weight of letter and then let us know whether if it's international letter or not, because that will matter, because if it was international, we'll do some math of it. And then essentially compute the output. So here's some rules. So if it's like no more than 30, so if it's like 30 or less, the post rate will be 41 cents. But then the total post rate is 41 cents plus every extra overweight cost. So that means for every gram it's over, we have to times it by 0.05. Okay, so we have some variables here. We have weight, international. I just call it char, and then I had set it to character, total cost and rate. And so I prompt the user and ask like, hey, so what is the weight of the letter? And then also tell me if it's an international letter. If it is, just enter Y or N. It doesn't matter in this case if they do like uppercase or lowercase, because after getting the input of weight and international, I went ahead and just lowered it, just because I have no faith that the user will answer it correctly. And so then in the if statement, I just said, hey, if the weight is bigger than 30, then what the math we need to do for that would be rate plus this whole segment, which would be the weight minus 30, times it for every 0.5. And then if it's 30 or more, then it's just going to set it to the rate, and that is the rate that you're going to be getting. So in this case, let's go ahead and just like run the code real quick. So it says, give me your weight, and let's say if it's like 31 grams and it's not international. Oh, and so let me explain this part. So if the international is equal to Y, then the total cost would be multiplied 1.15, because it says to increase by 15, the extra 15% of tax. So it'd be 1.5. So let's say it's not. And so then it says, okay, I was over by 1, so it did increase my total count. So, yep, so that's pretty much it for that. And now for problem 2. This one's a recursive function, so it's basically said we need to have like this Boolean match array and sum that takes array and int sum, using it recursively to evaluate whether all the sums of all elements is equal to the given value. So we have two arrays here. So essentially, we have an array here and we have the sum of it. So when we add up all the elements here, if it's equal to this, it should output true. If it's not equal to this, then it should output false. So if you add 2, 4, 5, 1 together, it should be 12. So this should output true. This should output false. This is recursively calling my function. I just set into a ternary operator, just saying, hey, if it's true, print true. If it's not, print false. So if we scroll up and then take a look at what that entails, so this one was a bit tricky. So I just had Boolean match. I just kind of separate out furthermore just to be a little bit more clear, but essentially it's doing the same thing where, okay, so I have an array of 4, and first this basically returns a Boolean function, and so essentially it should return true or false, and it takes in the array of numbers, and then this is the sum of what's the sum that we were trying to match it to. So we have an array size of 4, and then here we're going to recursively call the array sum. I did this for debugging purposes by breaking it down. And so in the array of sum, we pass in the array, and then we take the array size and we minus by 1, and then by recursively calling that, it would get us the total by adding all the elements. So the aim for array sum, if you look here, is just to add up all the elements together and return a number. And that's what this is doing. And this is just the edge case where in case if the index did is below 0, then we just return 0, because that would cause an array out of bounds. So this is recursively calling it by getting the index of that array and then calling the array sum over and over by passing the array and the index and subtracting it by 1. Once that's accomplished, set it to total, and then once we're going to evaluate what's the total, is it matching sum? If that's true, then return true. If it's not, return false. And so we already can tell that it returns true and false, which is correct. So now going on to problem 3. Problem 3 is, there's a lot of rules. So briefly, we're going to write a program and we're going to ask the user to, input a set of numbers, and essentially we'll stop if the user input like a negative number or 0, then we're just going to stop taking in inputs from the user. And what we're going to be keeping track is the number of even numbers and also the sum of 50 to 150, because that's a range that we're looking out for. And by doing that, we're going to have a counter that keeps tracks of the numbers that are in between 50 to 150. And then another thing is that we're also saving all integers regardless if it's even or odd, and we're saving if it's between the range of 100 and 200, but we have to use it dynamically using a dynamic array. And then in the two cases for both, one, we have to take care of the out of bound issue, and then the divided by 0 issue. And so going into here, this is the dynamic array that we're talking about. These are the variables we also mentioned. And then the one thing is also we have to display the percent of even numbers that were introduced by the user. So here's where we ask the user for the sequence of positive integers, and then the aim of this while loop is to essentially loop through by getting the user's like individual elements that they're inputting in the sequence. Once we get that, once we're looping through that, we're always incrementing the total counter. We'll be using that later down, so I'll explain why we needed total counter, but we're increasing total. That's the number of loops essentially of the program entering in this while loop, and that's what that does. So this if statement just checks to see, hey, if the number is less than or equal to 0, then just go ahead and just break out of this loop, and that's our terminating condition, our only terminating condition actually. And this one essentially aims to check to see if the number is even or not. If it is even, then go ahead and increase the even counter. If it's not, it's not going to increase the even counter. Here's where we're checking if it's between the ranges of 100 to 200. If it is, then we need to go ahead and first, real quick, double check if the array index is less than the size array, because this is where we declared it right here. It's 100. We're doing this and so it doesn't access the array out of bounds. That's the reason why we're having this if condition. And if it's good, then it's going to actually grab the dynamic array and its index and then set it to, or actually it grabs the number, it sets to that dynamic array's index, and then we're going to increment it for the next case. But in the case of the array index is greater than the size, then we're just not going to, we'll reach our max, we're done. So that's for that. And then for the aim for this if statement is to, if the num in sequence is greater or equal to 50, and if it's also less than or equal to 150, essentially this is a, hey, is my number between 50 to 150? If so, go ahead and add it to the sums 50 to 150 and then increase the counter. Now, at this point, I want to say that we actually exit the while loop when we get the condition. This is the exiting while loop. And so after that, we're going to do some calculations because we're trying to aim to find the percentage of even numbers that were displayed. And to do that, we just have to say, hey, first, we're going to double check to see if our total counter was 0. Because if off the bat they're going to put 0, then there is no even percentage. So we're just going to terminate it and just say even percentage is 0. Now, in the case that they were inputting a couple of numbers and total counter was not equal to 0, ideally it would be positive, and it should be. So essentially, what we're going to do is actually calculate the even percentage. And to do that, I just grabbed the even counter, which is an int, and I've casted to a double. And then I divide it by the total counter, which is a double. And then I multiply it by 100 just to get the even percentage. And then I went ahead and display it. And that's what I just fixed this, the even percentage to do decimal places to make it look proper. Then here, the aim of this if statement is to check to actually calculate the average of 50 to 150. So we're going to calculate how many numbers were present that are between 50 and 150 and divide that by the total counter, the number of 50 to 150 elements. But the reason why we have this if statement here is to make sure, hey, if the counter between 50 to 150 is 0, we're just going to say the average is 0. And then once we calculate that, we're going to just print it out and then, make the average 2 decimal places. And then finally, because we're working with dynamic arrays, we have to make sure we delete an AK release it from memory. So that's what this line does. So if we go ahead and play around here and we do 3, 5, 6, 80, 200, 150, 60, 61, and let's say 0. Okay. So even count, let's count. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 even numbers, so that's correct. And then if we do the calculations of it, that's about the number of even numbers there were in this set that I gave y'all was 55.56%. And then the sum between numbers that were between 50 and 150 is 351. So if we add 80, 150, 60, and 61, it'll give us 351. The counter between 50 to 51 is 4. Let's double check. This is between 50 to 150, so that's 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's correct, and then that is your average. So finally, we're going to go ahead and go into the last problem. So the last problem deals with us to essentially create like a multiplication table that's in the form of a triangle. And ideally, we ask the user, hey, what is the size of your triangle? And it's going to print out the lower right triangular multiplication table. And to do so, we asked it, we put their input into the variable called size, pass size into this method that's actually going to perform it. So if I take y'all there, it looks like this. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have 2 nested for loops. The first for loop aims to loops through the rows. The second for loop aims to loop through the columns. And then we're going to do something special. Right here, we're having an if statement, and this checks, this actually performs the calculations. This if statement, the first one is for the bottom right area, and this prints the number using this guy for formatting for the width. And this is using spacing for printing the format. This is important because this prints like the next new line, which gives us the triangle look. So if we go ahead and print here, let's say 5, it's going to look like this, and this is exactly what we wanted. So that's it.